welcome to the USF Transition Seminar, either in the classroom or online. And one thing I want to mention is okay to record your presentation.
Yes, I might have some things on the slides. I think I have all the pictures copyrighted. Are you planning on posting online?
It's a recorded presentation, but not the slides itself.
Perfect. I think we should be fine then for dissemination.
Okay. Yeah. So we put this on the Carter social media. And for that purpose, I will do a brief introduction of our seminar. So first of all, my name is Yu Zhang. I'm a professor in the CE department. And I'm moderating this seminar this semester, maybe next semester as well. So this seminar actually sponsored by our department as well as Center for Urban Transition Research, Carter. And it also co-sponsored by several UTCs housed at USF. One is the NISA, National Institute for Congestion Reduction, and the CTEC, Center for Transition Environment and Community Health, and also TomNet play the new tracks on the old model. And also it's facilitated by the ITE student chapter. And today we actually very glad to have Professor Laurie Garrow with us. And Professor Laurie Garrow from Georgia Tech, and she's a professor there as well as a co-director for the Urban and Regional Air Mobility Research Center. And she got the PhD degree from the Northwestern University, and she's expert in airline operation, and in the data analytics and the demand modeling and discrete choice modeling. And one thing I want to mention is she's currently the president of AgiForce. So AgiForce is a nonprofit organization for the airline operation management. And she's the first female president in 60 years for this organization, which is heavily oriented by the industry sector. And also she will serve the second term for this organization, and she's doing great to lead the industry as well as academic effort in this field. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Professor Laurie Garrow, and she will talk about the topic that what happened from the jet age to 9/11 and to some time now, maybe in the future as well. All right, please join me to welcome Professor Garrow.
Thank you, Dr. Tseng. Yeah, so in putting this presentation together, I decided to have a little bit of fun. Normally, I think you have a speaker come in who talks about their research and gets into a lot of the technical details. And recently, I've been asked to do presentations that are more broad or forward-thinking. So this really evolved out of a presentation I originally did as a keynote for the Airline Operations Conference they had asked me to do. And then it's been customized here a bit, thinking about game changers in aviation, really what's happened over the last 100 years, if you want to go back that far, thinking, and what lies in the future. So really just taking a more historical perspective of aviation and how it can influence our thinking on what we're doing today. So what is a game changer? Let's think about what that is. So a game changer is a newly introduced element or factor that changes an existing situation or activity in a significant way. In other words, we can think about it as something happens and it's really going to shift us or shape aviation in new directions. So some game changers include in 1958, we had the introduction of the first pressurized commercial jet. The Comet is what it was called. I would argue another game changer we'll go through is deregulation that happened in the airline industry in 1978, events of 9/11. And then a lot of people are thinking about whether or not COVID-19 is going to be a game changer, or if we want to look in the future, is it COVID-19 that's going to shape the airline industry or something else on the horizon? So the jet age is, I would argue, one of the biggest game changers that we've had in aviation. We can think about the evolution of this was that in 1945, World War II ended. There were some new technologies that came into play during that time period that ended up coming up with the first pressurized jet. So the Comet 1A in 1952 basically took its first paying customers from London to Johannesburg. Shortly thereafter, you had Pan Am come in the market, making the first transatlantic flight from New York to Paris on a Boeing aircraft 707. And then in 1959, Delta and United initiated jet service on the DC-8s. Then once the jets came in, you also started then seeing changes in infrastructure at the airports. Atlanta, hometown, so you'll see a lot of that throughout here. Atlanta Airport revealed its first terminal specifically designed for the jet age. And then again, you just see these continual advances in short range and long range aircraft that were continually providing improvements in fuel efficiency, speed, range, and costs. You start with a Comet, go up to the Boeing 747 jet. Okay, so I mentioned the Comet. This was the first jet aircraft, the Comet. I love this picture, right? Look at the toe. What's the toe? Farm vehicle, right? We didn't have tow engines, so we're basically towing our new aircraft with our farm vehicles that we're using. This is the inaugural flight. World's first jetliner service. Comet happened on 2nd of May, 1952. How'd they get the passengers out? Bust them. I don't see jetways, right? So we have a new aircraft. We're basically busing them out, towing them. This is a picture shortly thereafter, just showing the new scale of the aircraft. These were the jet engines. They were called the ghost engines at the time. And this one, again, I guess we don't want to talk about our emissions coming in, but this is the power of the jets looking at takeoff for that original Comet aircraft. This one I love. This was our first jet airline routes in 1953. So when you wanted to go to London to Johannesburg, range of the aircraft was such that you needed to make probably 8 stops to get there, right? You couldn't get on the aircraft in London and end up in Johannesburg. So the route maps were basically set to look at the range of the aircraft. And then you'll see that going from London to Johannesburg, yeah, I left at 2:25 in the afternoon, and basically I got there practically the day later after making all of the stops along the way, and then you had your return flights. So early in the day, when you looked at the Comet, from London to Johannesburg, we were looking at service that was basically 3, I'm going to go to flights with all these stops a week. London to Colombo was 1, right? So you had less than daily service occurring. Number of stops basically was anywhere from 1 to 5. So you can start seeing a stage length or statute miles of about 2,500. One-way travel times to go from London to Tokyo, 36 hours, nothing major to do that. And then for me, it's interesting looking at the fares and then translating them into round trip today. So originally they only had first class service, and the fares were around, $11,000 to $16,000 in today's terms. If we think about that, though, looking from London to Johannesburg, actually, if you want to look at the full flex fare in first class, it's equivalent, right? The first class fares are actually the same as they were if you want to view it back in the day. I would argue the service is probably a little better, shorter flights. The difference is that now in aviation, we've got our basic economy or other types of fares coming into play. Okay, so why was the Comet a game changer? Well, key thing is that, you had your ghost engines that provided a lot of thrust, but at the time, propeller planes were both noisy and bumpy. So flying back in the day before you had pressurized cabins was at lower level, and just imagine a lot of bumpiness going on. Jet engines consume 3 to 4 times more fuel at 10,000 feet than 30,000 feet. So if I can get the pressurization up, if I can get the aircraft up in the air, I'm going to save a lot of fuel savings. We found that, so that's both this jet engines combined with pressurization that were most fuel efficient. Stage length, again, we started out at 1,500 to 2,200, 36 passengers, 6 crew, and 30 bags of mail. Back in the day, aviation wasn't really carrying as many passengers as it was mail. Only first class service. And then this stat I love, in the first year of operation, it carried 30,000 passengers and expected to break even at a 42% load factor. So I only needed 15 to 18 passengers on board the aircraft in order to break even. Okay, the Comet, however, had a major problem. Does anybody know this from history? Okay, well, all right, so let me ask the student. All right, so what do you notice about that aircraft? What looks different about that aircraft today or then versus today? Is there anything about that aircraft that strikes you as being different? Talk to me about the windows. The windows look the same or different? They're square, aren't they? Okay, what am I doing to this aircraft? I'm pressurizing it and I'm depressurizing it. What do we remember from structures? Pressure and cracks. Better to have something round or better to have something square that's got a point that can create fractures? Okay, so what we found is that there was an engineering design flaw in this. The square metals contribute to metal fatigue. We're taking these pressurizing, unpressurizing, and I got a square point. And so what happened, unfortunately, is the Comet basically had multiple accidents in the air, and they basically just blew apart in there. So there were a lot of safety issues at the beginning. Comet was looking to address this. Honestly, Boeing and McDonnell Douglas sort of learned from these early accidents early on, and they were able to enter the market and just sort of take off with the Boeing 707 and the DC-8. So initially then, what we see is we had our first flights of Boeing 707 and DC-8. Pan Am launched service on October 28th. Again, I told you I'm from Atlanta, so I'm going to be happy again here. Delta and United launched DC-8 service on the same day. United actually took off first from San Francisco, but Delta landed first in Atlanta. So Delta gets the honors as being the first official service on the DC-8 because it landed first. On-time performance has always been important, right? That's how I view that. Okay, so game changers. I said something about a game changer is you have to fundamentally change the industry. So why was the Boeing 707 and the DC-8 game changers? Well, they cut flying times by 40%. Go faster. Doubled the capacity for passengers and cargo compared to the larger piston engines. It started bringing air travel to the masses by offering multiple classes of service. And so IATA quotes that between 1950 and 70, global air passengers increased by over 10% as the rapid technology improvements brought down the cost of jet travel by an average of 5% a year. So we're seeing technology advancements in addition to decreasing costs. And then again, from a game changer perspective, it required massive changes in what we did. Landside operations, more people traveling. All of a sudden, I need parking lots, check-in areas, baggage handling, security systems, airside operations, refueling, ground handling, jet bridges, new terminal designs, right? Because I need more runway space to take these off. And then it also impacted, air traffic control. So this is then a look at the jet service from Pan Am's perspective in 1957. So we start seeing Pan Am was one of the more global airlines going around. So that's 1957, and this is like 1960. So again, you just start seeing new routes coming in. It's interesting for me to think about how did the airlines market these new services when they came out, right? So the DC-8, this is from Delta's perspective. Do you know what these are on the right-hand side? New York, Detroit, Miami, Houston, Dallas, Atlanta, Chicago. What these 5 digits are? Those are phone numbers. We didn't need 10 digits back in the day. We needed 5. These are the numbers that you called for your reservation to make your ticket. And so here Delta is basically promoting, built by Douglas. This is the world's most advanced type of jetliner. Of 15 cities in the US now or soon, Delta will serve 7. So those were the initial 7 that they were offering this jetliner service out of. And then they're looking at rolling others in. This is what happened back in the day when you called a reservation number. So this literally is a reservation system. Each one of those folders is basically a flight that has the passenger manifest. So you call, it's a lazy Susan, so you spin around, you basically get your flight out and you add your name to the list going on. So this was a very manual process back in the day on what the reservation systems look like. And this, I love this picture because it basically shows this is the new DC-8 service and what they're promoting. So you've got, your business class cabin, but look at this. This is a little girl in first class playing with blocks. And what are they promoting? First class lounge is a scene for a demonstration of the remarkable vibration-free characteristics of the smooth flying DC-8 as children play with balancing block game at an atmosphere of quiet and comfort. Cruising almost 600 miles an hour at 30,000 feet in the realm of jets, most weather is left far below. So you get to see a comparison between what it was like flying at 10,000 feet, loud, almost throwing up with, motion sickness, to, oh, it's so vibration free that your kids can basically play with building blocks. Now, I think us that are flying would probably argue with that today, but again, you get this quieter, less vibrations, faster aircraft. Sounds a lot like, you know, what we're thinking today, right, on the new electric aircraft. You also start seeing references to coach or references to price savings. So for those that were not probably familiar, Ben Franklin is an icon in US culture. He was known for his thriftiness and saving. So here you have Ben Franklin from colonial times sitting in the coach seat. And we note that compared to a coach and fours speed of perhaps 40 miles a day, so compared to a horse and buggy, the DC-8 speed of nearly 600 miles an hour would be pleasant, although difficult to believe. And most appealing to Ben Franklin, however, would be the fare, reasonable and only 5 pennies a mile, roughly comparable to what it took you to take a horse back in the day between Philly and Baltimore. So again, you see this promotion of faster, cheaper service, vibrations, etc. And then this was how the DC-8 was explained to the public. So you see the layout here. First class is like the blue. The lounges that we saw was in the green area at the front. You've got coach in the back. But it basically says that, wow, this thing is B, the giant size of the DC-8. You've got a cabin floor on the second story. So really putting in the context the size that was coming in. You also start seeing airports really had to make a lot of differences. So the idea of a 2-story concourse was new. You got your boarding area is on the second floor, right? So 2-story concourse. You also had changes in drop-off and main ticketing levels. So oftentimes now, right, at airports, you see baggage claim and pick up on one level and passenger drop-off on the other. That was to help get more passengers through. Okay, Atlanta Airport, again, was one of the first terminals designed for the jet aircraft. Airport terminal opened on May 3rd, 1961. It was the largest passenger terminal in the country. I want you to look at the picture on the right, because basically the airport exceeded its capacity within a few years. What do you think is going on the right, though? This is actually at Atlanta Hartsfield Airport. What do you notice? Anything in that picture you notice? Does it look like people that are getting ready to board an aircraft? They're outside, right? What are they doing? What's this? This is a camera. Well, exceeded design capacity within the first year because Atlanta suddenly became a major tourist attraction. Everybody wanted to go out and see the aircraft take off and land. So these are people, again, before the days of security, when basically you could go to the airport and sit on the rooftop. The rooftop is actually there. This is the backlog of people going up at one of the concourses in Atlanta. So quite a different aspect there. And then again, I would argue that there's no doubt that the jet engines were a game changer for aviation. You think about, we started at that, you know, about 50 passenger Comet, and then like the newest 747 can carry up to 605. So we've seen these continual improvements in technology, fuel efficiency, you know, fare reductions that really have helped shape aviation. So I hope you agree with me that this is one of the game changers. Okay, deregulation. That's the second one I'm going to talk about. Before we think about why we went through deregulation, though, it's helpful to think about why were we regulated in the first place. So Franklin Roosevelt, one of our presidents, signed the Civil Aeronautics Act in 1938, and the Civil Aeronautics Board, CAB, was formed to regulate the entry, exit, frequency of service, and fares. In other words, the government told you when you could fly, where you could fly, how often you could fly, and what fare to charge. Okay, so regulation was really, okay, we're regulating that. The reason this really came about is that the 1930s saw a lot of accidents occurring, a lot of, just the safety issues were of concern, so they wanted to do more regulation. 16 carriers were what are part of the original service at the time. And it's interesting to look at what happened. So today, of the original 16, we've got 3 that are left in name: American, Delta, and United. Some of them you may recognize, like they merged. Continental merged with United, Northwest merged with Delta. But some of the other ones were like Braniff Airlines, TWA, Eastern. They were smaller regional areas coming about. And for me, it's fascinating looking at the route structures and how they evolved from the 1940s to 1960s. So you see, Braniff Airways really served, part of the U.S. Chicago and Southern served Chicago and some Southern routes. Capital Airlines, which was formerly Pennsylvania Central, served the capital of the D.C. area further out. So like getting, again, to, from one place to the other, going from East Coast to West Coast, you really had to pick your airlines and probably do transfers to get where you needed to go. You can see some others here on expansion. So you've got American Airlines. That's what was American from like the 1940s. United. I mean, they were baby structures, right? That happened or started. Delta. This was Delta's original structure. And then again, you start seeing other ones here, TWA, Eastern. So you get this regional sense. And then the impetus for deregulation was really between 1955 and 1972. Passenger numbers basically quadrupled. And so by 1972, almost half of Americans had flown, but we were still looking mostly at business passengers. Interesting, Robert Crandall was the CEO of American Airlines. He testified to the CAB that he basically supported deregulation. Part of the reason was that between 1950 and 1974, 79 new carriers asked to enter into the air transportation system. CAB approved 0. Okay, so really hard to argue that you've got open market competition on that. There was a general belief that regulation kept fares high and prevented efficient operations. We're going to come back to this, but it's interesting to note that in 1971, Southwest Airlines began service within Texas. Texas is a state, so just keep that in mind. Texas is a state, and I just said that you couldn't get applications approved. Well, CAB regulated interstate, between state transportation. Southwest was operating only within the Texas borders. So you had a couple pop up in Texas, Florida, California. So these new airlines were coming up, and guess what? They were offering a lot lower fares and giving signals that basically showed that these new airlines would be able to lower the fares. The other thing we see is that, boy, those original airlines, their network structures had really expanded. So this was United in 1940. This was United in 1978, and it already had merged with Capital. Delta in 1960, Delta in 1978 had already merged with Chicago and Southern and Northeast. So you're seeing, again, sort of this concentration happening. And then again, Southwest, what was interesting about that is they were within the state, right? So they used that when they were looking at deregulation to help justify the motivation for lower fares. Okay, so we know that American was for deregulation. You think all the carriers were for deregulation? No, actually, Delta was against it. Delta called airline deregulation the wolf in sheep's clothing. And so that's like, again, another acronym that, oh, it looks like a nice little sheep, and then there's a wolf underneath it, right? So that's another phrase we sometimes use to say something's hidden. And I love the quote here that basically is coming from Delta that said, the greatest risk to deregulation is that no one in Congress, the executive branch of the federal government, or any place else has a crystal ball that's going to let him foresee the results of experimentation for such an untested concept. In this respect, the American traveling and shipping public is being asked to take a tremendous gamble. The debate has shown that the free entry and free exit concept could very well result in concentration in the airline industry in the hands of only a few carriers, of causing service deterioration at smaller cities and in smaller markets, and is jeopardizing the financing of airport developments, among other problems. Okay, so we think this happened or it didn't happen, right? I mean, those seem like, if they're true, they're going to be pretty big game changers for aviation. Well, whose predictions were correct? So on the positive side, we could have entry of new carriers through either low cost or ultra low cost carriers, lower fares. Negative outcomes mentioned were market concentration through mergers and acquisitions or bankruptcies. Other negative outcomes not mentioned there, but elsewhere, are fare premiums at hub airports. Basically, think about it as the monopoly. Loss of service to smaller communities and highly erratic profit and loss cycles. So first, from 1978 to 1983, we saw this new and expanded market entry. Okay, deregulation's here, let's go. So a lot of new and expanded market entry came in. The market share of the original trunk airlines dropped from 87% to 75%. And this was really because like Southwest and Air California that were bound by their state borders before started expanding. You had new regional aircraft like Republic US Airways come out, and birth of new airlines, American West, People Express, Midwest Express, et cetera. However, once you had this new market expansion, then from 84 to 93, we started getting concentration in market share among the major carriers. So at this point, American, Continental, Northwest, United, US Air became the dominant carriers. Saw a lot go bankrupt, right? They couldn't keep up. Braniff, Eastern, and Pan Am. And so then again, now we're seeing this concentration come in. Remaining 10 largest held 97% of the market share by 1991. All right, but then 1990s come in. We've got internet came on play. New pricing structures come in, and we started seeing this expansion again of the low-cost carriers. So we have Frontier of today, JetBlue, Spirit emerge in the market. Southwest continued to grow. So again, we see these sort of cycles come in. And then I would argue 2001 to 2022, we just saw tremendous consolidation through mergers and acquisitions. Continental to United, Virgin America to Alaska. This one I think I just updated to be the other way, but Spirit, is it going to be Frontier? Is it going to be JetBlue? Going to be Frontier? Going to be JetBlue, right? That was sort of the last one looking at this year. So you just see this consolidation that's happened. And then at the same time, on the international front, international markets, you can't, buy a foreign carrier for more than, 51%. They don't like that foreign ownership. So you see joint ventures occur that basically are two or more airlines getting together to decide how they're going to share revenue and share costs on certain routes. So this is Delta's joint venture network that includes Air Mexico, LATAM, that just got approved by regulators. Air France, KLM, Virgin Atlantic, Korean Air coming on board. So it's really a way to expand internationally as well. Okay, so why was deregulation a game changer, right? All right, so we see different types of things, but the key thing is that ticket prices did go down. This is some from 2016, so before COVID, looking at ticket prices are at historical lows. And then the other thing is that competition did go up. So overall, the average number of competitive choices for air travel has increased over the past 2 decades. So this is just a chart showing how the average number of competitors in the U.S. domestic city pairs has tended to go up over time. As the low-cost carriers came on the market in the domestic U.S., other of the legacy carriers like Delta, United, and American tended to shift more of their traffic international. So here we're looking at domestic market share, domestic share of U.S. OD passengers. And among American, Delta, and United, in 2016, it was 54%. In 2000, though, it was 73%. So again, you see the shift or mix of carriers that's happened over time. Southwest is in blue, going from 16 to 24. And then other U.S. carriers are also penetrating the market. And now you're seeing some expansion, right, of the low-cost carriers going international as well. But it's really been, changes, structural changes we've seen. And then, our poor non-hubs, right? It was predicted that we were going to see a loss of service to some of our smaller communities, and that definitely happened. So here's our seat capacity by airport over 2000 to 2018. FAA classifies airports by different sizes, large hub being the largest, medium being the medium, small, and then non-hub. So large hub is up, but like non-hub is down 22%. And that's by our seat capacity. And then also system flights, we see the same trends where, again, more efficient aircraft, but really our regional, our non-hub airports, smaller communities have really taken a hit, I would argue. So the figure on the left then is, I saw this presentation by Hansman in 2006. And it was basically saying that, in airlines, someone asked me the question about owning stock earlier, airlines is highly volatile, right? You get these cycles coming in. The scale of this, by the way, is 6 on the left-hand side, 6 billion. Scale on this one is 100 billion, okay? So like this would be tiny if I put them together. But you see this, we sort of were profitable. Deregulation happened, down, up, down, right? You start seeing these cycles. And then, yeah, we had an era of profitability before COVID, right? We get these swings and they seem to be becoming much more prevalent in. So we've got these financial cycles that have happened in aviation post deregulation that, yeah, if I'm telling you where to fly, when to fly, how often to fly, and what price to charge, I can do a pretty good job at making sure you get a profit, right? If I throw you into competition structure, yeah, a lot of different things can happen. And a lot of times we say you're following your, I don't want to say dumbest competitor, but you're following, the competitor. Yeah, you have to follow what your competitors are doing, whether or not they may have the most profitable strategies or not, right, to maintain demand. Okay, so in summary, why was deregulation a game changer? Okay, it did lower fares, but I argue it created a tension in the market between expansion and consolidation, resulted in these volatile profit and loss cycles that are getting bigger over time, and I think are a major concern moving forward, spurred different business models across competitors. So we have no frills point-to-point service from the low-cost carriers competing with the traditional hub and spoke. And my argument is it also likely contributed to the reduction of service to our smaller communities. So I think there were pros and cons. Crandall versus Delta both had points going into deregulation. Okay, 9/11, another game changer. You guys are probably too young to remember this, but believe it or not, before 9/11, I say there was no security lines. There was security, but there was security. You tended to get to the airport and there weren't like long lines you could get through. And you could actually go through with your shoes on or your jacket. You used to be able to go to the gate and meet travelers, right? That to me is such a foreign concept now. But you actually used to get to the airport early, park, go through security, have, dinner, right, at one of the concession stands, and then, meet your passengers there. I mean, again, I know security has changed, but you used to be able to bring box cutters and cigarette lighters on board, right? Just, things that, you can't clearly do that now. In terms of the infrastructure, though, because passengers could go through the gate areas, most of the concessions were after check-in. Now, when you go to the airport, note, think Tampa, right? A lot of the concessions are before you go through the checkpoint, because that's where you have to wait for passengers, or again, you can't clear security to go meet them at the gate. So after 9/11, we had a new Department of Homeland Security was formed. We had new security requirements, new requirements to protect the cockpit and passengers. It seems like we still have these ever-evolving security protocols, right? And we might be getting smarter at it, but I'm willing to bet that even in our lifetime, there will be new security protocols that come in place. Liquids, right? Remember, you used to be able to take liquids on board for the most part, like an actual shampoo bottle. Shoes. We've had new scanners for luggage and passengers that are very heavy that we've had to put in our airports. So looking at where we're going to stage them, how to do the screening. We had design of new known traveler programs. And again, 9/11 also created losses, right? So it's just also contributing to some of that volatility we saw. So I think, for me, it's clear 9/11 was a game changer. We also saw, again, air service disproportionately hit the short haul markets. So this one, I think, was an 18 months. Decline in OD passengers year ending 2003 versus June of 2001. So it's about a 2-year period in the decline of O&D passengers. And we clearly see that, again, with the increased security requirements, it just became painful to go to the airport, clear security, and then travel. So a lot of people were just getting in the car and going instead. Okay, take a vote. How many of us believe that the COVID-19 is going to be a game changer for aviation? How many have flown since COVID? Okay, have you seen a lot of differences? What have you seen that's different now versus before? Subtle, right? Subtle changes. Some people wear masks. During COVID, there was decision to make things more clean and fuel efficient. Not sure if you've noticed, but the onboard magazines in aircraft have actually gone away because you touch the magazine and it's, so they do more onboard cleaning. The magazines have gone away. A lot of the things have become electronic. Like if you're buying food on board, you do that through your touch screen now instead of on paper products going in. But I think most of the changes happened early on in terms of possible boarding procedures or, again, looking at sanitation procedures in terms of how often we clean the aircraft. They were increasing turn times at the airport to do more sanitation. But for the most part, what we're seeing is that, okay, we are seeing a change in mix of business and leisure passengers. This remote work, blending of, remote work and blending of business and leisure trips. Likely impact on aviation, though, I'm going to argue, is medium because you can, move aircraft around pretty easily, change your RM systems. New sanitation procedures early on made an impact, but now we're seeing sort of minimum impact on turn times. A lot of the things we're seeing, like the increase in the low-cost carrier market shares in the US that happened with the switch to leisure, early retirement of pilots, guys, those were all things that were in play ahead of time. Like COVID just accelerated trends that we were seeing in the industry. So it accelerated the LCC expansion, accelerated our issue of early retirement of pilots. One thing that we're going to see is that there is this sort of emphasis on flexibility now. So before, when you had a ticket on many of the US carriers and you wanted to change, you paid a change fee of $150 to $200. Internationally was more, but let's say $100. Now, if you want to change your fare, there's no change fee. You basically just pay the fare difference, or if your fare is lower, then you can get that credited towards a future flight. So the change fees sort of make it easier for cancellations, make it easier for you to shift, can impact the demand distributions. But again, we can handle that, right? A lot of the crews wanted flexibility as well for bidding on their flights, like just looking at different work rules coming in. Emphasis on flexibility. Again, financial is consistent with other trends we've seen, right? We definitely had volatility, but we've had that before. The one area when I was putting this together that we were thinking we might see the biggest impact on was on entry requirements. Like, I don't know right now if I could go to China, right? They just seem to have lockdowns in place, different rules in place. As a traveler going internationally, do you want to navigate that, or do you want like a firm basically saying this is exactly what you need to do to get in? We will make your trip seamless for you. Make sure you have your documents together. So if the complexity for the travel increases, that looks like it would provide an opportunity to come in and see like health passports or firms that specialize in this total trip experience. Or like if you have to quarantine, you buy insurance, you know what's going on, right? So it's basically providing more certainty on your trip instead of being sick, stuck somewhere and not knowing what to do. So that was the one thought we thought would come out, but things, again, most places seem to have relaxed quarantine coming down, but in some parts of the world you may, I don't know, it was our hypothesis we might see this come. So I don't think this looks like a game changer, right? We're not seeing infrastructure, we're not really seeing anything. Okay, maybe development of a new firm. This doesn't look to me like a game changer. So we got to come up with some game changer. So what do we think it's going to be? Well, given you invited me in and Dr. Zhang's working in the area, you could probably guess that I'm going to guess, right? I mean, you can guess it. I'm going to think it's probably going to be the introduction of electric aircraft coming into play. So I'm going to guess battery-powered aircraft and distributed propulsion are the new technologies that are going to be game changers for aviation. So why is aviation electrifying? I'm going to give courtesy to Brian German at Georgia Tech that allowed me to borrow these slides. Electric aircraft are greener, right? However you want to define it. Less expensive to operate. Please don't quote me on these numbers. These are my back of the envelope calculations, because if I give you numbers of how much like a gallon of jet fuel costs, people can't translate it. So a lot of assumptions here, but basically it's going to reduce costs. Let's say from $60 per passenger hour down to 60 from about 89. Our maintenance costs also go down with distributed propulsion battery. Quieter and more comfortable. Eliminates combustion noise from piston engines. Reduces cabin vibrations. Starting to see this look familiar, right? To some of the stuff we talked about on the introduction of the jet age and the little delta, like work with your blocks, right? A lot of this is similar. Noise, vibration, costs. Okay. What have been the barriers to electric aircraft development? We simply haven't had the technology. We haven't had the battery energy. We haven't had the power on electric motors. And we really haven't had a need up till now to know how we're going to certify the given aircraft. So we've got various barriers going on, but it looks like, the stars are aligning, right, for these new technologies to come into place. Is it happening? Well, yeah, it is. So here's the Pipistrel Velis Electro. Okay, Florida Institute of Technology took delivery for their MS in Flight Test Engineering program. These are some of the aircraft that are looking at the state of California. This is training that's occurring, so you can start seeing the size of the aircraft. These are the actual battery chargers, I think, in the foreground. So you get to see the Velis Electro in size of the battery chargers coming in. Again, just sort of pictures are worth 1,000 words. But we're starting to see this come in. We're seeing dramatically lower operating costs. And then the maintenance cost, again, for replacement of motor maintenance is $500. And yeah, those are the key points I'll make here. These are example of other electric aircraft coming in. I have these organized from left to right in terms of fewest number of passengers to larger number of passengers. So you can sort of see from a weight or implementation perspective, we're probably most likely to start on the left to go to the right. By Aerospace is looking at 2 or 4 seaters. They quote a range of up to 300 nautical miles, speed of about 110 to 130. Several purchase agreements in place. They're not certified yet, but again, they're starting, pushes, to certify them early. You have another, again, a 9-seater coming in, certifications underway. 11-seater, again, saying certifications planned, coming in. So different designs are in the market. Further out, electric and hydrogen power regional aircraft might be in play because we don't know if we're going to be able to do longer distances just using fully battery electric. One is Hart Aerospace, the design there on the left for a 19-seater range of 250 miles. But really, you've got other work going on more on the hydrogen fueled as well that really shows potential for, again, the longer range up to 1,000 nautical miles. Many of you are working on this, and the aircraft designs are probably old compared to what they are here on the pictures, but you're also seeing the rise of eVTOL urban air taxis, different designs coming in place. And then several have gone public with valuations of 2 to 4 billion. And we're starting to expect certifications for these aircraft coming in. Okay, so to be a game changer, you have to introduce something in the market, and then it's got to have rippling changes, right? Not just on aviation, but other things like infrastructure. So how do we think that these new aircraft are going to impact markets and society? Well, reduced costs will increase the affordability of flight training. Ooh, that's a key workforce development one, right? So let's say that now, instead of flight training being at a price point of $200 an hour, you're able to bring it down to $150 an hour. That reduces the flight training costs. In theory, that could help overcome the national shortage of commercial pilots. We're going to have UAM, RAM, AAM, different stages of where these aircraft could go. In the cities, potential for overflying traffic. Looking at the travel time savings as a main argument for the urban air mobility. Cargo, though, could increase dramatically as well because of reduced costs. Regional flights of 250 miles or greater could also come into play. This could help reinvigorate our smaller airports that took a hit. It was seen during deregulation after 9/11. And then we've got workforce development in terms of, we're building these aircraft. They have to be manufactured, operated, maintained, new maintenance protocols coming in place, et cetera. And these are some of the reports that basically have talked about how these new aircraft are going to affect markets and society. Infrastructure, just as we saw with the introduction of the jet engine and Atlanta Hartsfield Airport needing to revitalize, so too are we going to need major infrastructure for supporting our electric and hydrogen aircraft. We're going to need battery chargers. We're going to need electrical distribution grids at our airports, probably solar power installations at airports to recharge our ground battery banks. We don't think about this, but specialized firefighting equipment, right? Batteries operate different than jet engines. So specialized firefighting, again, hydrogen storage and fueling, vertiports are a major infrastructure, new ATM systems, new terminal and gate facilities, right? So we're going to need a whole infrastructure to support them. think there was one more. We're Georgia. We like to look at what other states are doing. We just heard that, Florida's created sort of a working panel on this. Ohio is one of the states that we often keep an eye on. They have a Fly Ohio initiative. They do a lot of collaborations with Air Force and NASA, offer a lot of mobility symposiums. Texas had the creation of an Urban Air Mobility Advisory Committee looking in. A lot of the initial Uber work was focused on the Dallas-Fort Worth as like a test case area. The state of Washington has also been doing electric aircraft feasibility studies. And then a big one is that many states seem to be coordinating with the Community Air Mobility Initiative, or CAMI, to help think about, if these new aircraft come into play, how are we as a region going to support those initiatives? So again, why do I think electrification is going to be a game changer for aviation? Well, similar to what we saw with the introduction of the jet engine, it's going to require new infrastructure on the ground and in the sky. I think that it shows great potential to help us address some key issues in aviation, like pilot shortages and emissions. For me, it exhibits a lot of parallels with what we saw with the introduction of the jet engine. It was expensive to start with. It had really short ranges, but with continuous technological improvements, we were able to increase the range and speed and make it accessible to the masses. So if we think about urban air mobility, regional air mobility as starting out, yeah, okay, fine, I agree. We're probably going to be targeting high-income individuals to get the service off the ground, pun intended. But if you look longer term at the infrastructure investments or vision, similar to what we've seen in other technology areas in aviation, we can probably look at UAM, RAM as being more accessible, helping address some of our equity concerns. And then the other thing I like is that I've seen great potential for lowering operating costs for trips less than 250 miles. That area that we saw after 9/11 really took a hit. And so we may be able to reverse trends we've seen for smaller communities in these non-hub airports. And then what I like to say is, remember the quote from Delta on deregulation. So I'm going to end by saying that, if you say, this is Garrow's quote, I would argue never before have we attempted to integrate aircraft within our urban cores, right? This is an untested experiment, just like Delta said about deregulation. And the idea that, like deregulation, we can only begin to imagine what the implications are. So again, when I think about trends I'm seeing on other game changers in aviation, thinking about the electric aircraft, it's fun to think about it. But honestly, guys, I think if we're here from 20 years, we're only beginning to think about how this could have revolutionized, our lives, or had impacts on society. All right, so not a lot of math on this one. I warned you about that up front. Further information is available. I did mention, and I'd like to mention online, that was mentioned that I'm president of AGIFORS, AGIFORS. Nonprofit organization focuses on airline operations research, and they offer scholarships for students. So please check out our website. We offer one that's a mentoring program early on. If you're doing work in aviation, where you basically get to come to one of our meetings, if you win the scholarship and get mentorship on your master's and PhD from industry experts. And then we offer a best paper competition that's normally competitive when you're about ready to finish up your doctoral dissertation. And free trips to parts of the world, and they're about $2,500 to $1,000 a piece. All right, any questions? I think we've got about 10 minutes. Things you agree with, things you disagree with. Again, you're allowed to challenge on different fronts.
A comment, observation, really, which maybe you can, expand on or not as you choose. But I thought it was interesting that Delta was opposed to deregulation. 1978. I was not aware of that.
I wasn't either until I looked at it.
But jump forward 40 years, and in around 2015, Delta was opposed to privatization of air traffic control services in the United States and withdrew, as you know, from Airlines for America. isn't that curious that it's in both cases it was Delta that was sort of opposed to free market solutions?
So I can't speak. I wasn't around in the 1950s to be able to comment on the original one. I'm not that old. And then one thing, though, I think on the air traffic control side is that, especially after COVID and the recovery of the airline industry, the delays in operational performance have been a challenge, right? And I would argue that the airlines have been pushing for modernization of ATC hard, and Scott Kirby at United Airlines has been a strong advocate, right, of looking at just fixing ATC however we do it, modernizing it. Originally, I would say he came out very strong. Now he realizes it needs to be a collaboration, like fund air traffic controllers, look at things. And being in Florida, right, you guys, I think, have taken a particular hit on your on-time performance, right? Some of the air traffic control in the state of Florida is known for not as I mean, again, when you had a lot of leisure travel during COVID, a lot of it was going to Florida. All of a sudden, you had a surge in flights in the air, and you've got to realign ATC for that. So probably not answering your question directly, but what I'm seeing is more of a recognition that we're reaching capacity on ATC in some of our important corridors, Northeast, Florida being a key one, and that we've got to revisit modernization of ATC. And I'm seeing general movement by that, definitely by Scott Kirby at United, but other airlines as well. Tim Nisnik at American, for instance, has been a big proponent of supporting, ATC, our FAA staffing needs.
Laurie, I have a question regarding the deregulation. So you mentioned there is reduction of seat capacity at the small hub airport or non-hub airport. And I think there's one thing after deregulation is a change of the network from point to point to the hub and spoke, starting from early 1990s. I think that changed the kind of the seat capacity assignment for different markets. Yeah. But meanwhile, I think, I'm not sure, is previously there's a load factor ratio, and then later probably another level of load factor. So reduction of the seat capacity not necessarily not able to accommodate the demand from those small markets. So I was wondering, for the 22 seat capacity reduction, is that kind of reject 20% of the demand, or still they can accommodate the demand, but with higher load factor, and thanks to the hub and spoke network?
Right. So the seat capacity alone, right, would be the number of seats that were coming out of the market. So we do see that reduction in at least the number of seats going out, but the load factors for profitability in general, I think, tended to be lower before deregulation than afterwards, right? So now our profitability factor is not the Comet 44%. We're probably 70% and higher. There were multiple things that came in. Also, some of the aircraft technologies, right? We had the prop engines that weren't necessarily fuel efficient. And so some of it too was looking at where to put our 50-seaters in more profitable markets. So I think there were multiple factors at play, not necessarily just due to deregulation on the smaller communities. I agree.
Any questions from students?
Hello, ma'am. It's a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So my question is, what's the price? I mean, what's the fare it's going to be for Uber? Was it a taxi? What do you think?
So what's the fare going to be for the new electric aircraft coming out?
Yes.
I'm going to answer this diplomatically, in that one of the concerns that I have if we are looking at major multi-million-dollar infrastructure improvements is that I think as researchers, it is our job to look at a range of prices on sensitivity tests in order to see where we may have minimum viable products, or as technology improves over time, how the demand curves may kick into play. So my sense is that we have some numbers out there at a passenger dollar per mile that are $1 per passenger mile or $2 per passenger mile that may be very aggressive, especially at the launch. I think that me personally, I believe that the cost per passenger mile is going to be higher. And so I know that's probably not answering your question, but given you have a diversity of opinions and a diversity of prior studies that are out there, I think it's our responsibility as researchers to be able to test that range and see, for instance, if someone's saying $1 per passenger mile or $1.50 per passenger mile, if that operational model or ability to offer that service falls apart, if it's twice that or in a range that might be, $3 or $4 per passenger mile.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hopefully that was diplomatic, right?
Okay, I think you can hear me now. So I want to ask a question about the workforce development, because you mentioned that we have shortage of pilots, but for most of the students here, we only have one pilot here, but not commercial pilots, I think general aviation. But most of the students here will not be a pilot, but engineer or, so I was wondering, because you have so much experience working with industry. So where do you think the career opportunities for the students in the airline industry?
Okay, so I'm going to answer broadly, and then I'm going to answer it knowing that many of you coming from civil engineering. Okay, so broadly, one of the areas that we're seeing a lot of workforce development in is the actual building and manufacturing of aircraft. So if you think about needing to ramp up quickly on building of the aircraft, you will need to basically look at the manufacturing or come up with more efficient manufacturing pipelines, or other things I've heard is possibly translating auto lines into aircraft manufacturing lines, or using that existing infrastructure. So probably the key one I see is that we're going to need training in the manufacturing. We're going to need training in the maintenance as well, just as we saw new mechanics that were needed when we introduced electric vehicles. We're going to need advanced training on how to do mechanics training as well. Okay, so if you're a mechanical engineer, that's great, right? If you're a manufacturing engineer, that's great. For civil engineering, if we think about our area of focus is mostly on the operations side or the demand modeling side, I think that there's a need for tools that help city governments, OEM operators, basically help evaluate, right, different operational models, look at where to put the vertiports. A lot of the work that's being done here, I see that other companies are going to need that, particularly thinking about like a tool that government agencies can use. I see a lot of the agencies struggling with what do we do next, right? Okay, so it's coming. What should the state of Florida do, or the state of Georgia, to either help support UAM, AAM? Should we be investing in electric charging stations at our regional airports? Should we be doing, how should we be doing air traffic, control requests, or, requests to come in and fly these new aircraft, so to speak. So especially if you're on the city planning or regional side, I see a lot of opportunities there for helping design and implement policies.
I want to ask a follow-up question about the vertiport. Previously, when people think about the eVTOL vertiport, it's like the telepads, which is pretty simple, like used now on the rooftop. But now you mentioned about the battery, maybe some needs of, firefighter equipment or manpower there at the vertiport, and also probably security checking, depends on what regulation is. So then it looks like a vertiport could become pretty complicated and needs supported by more crew members. That will certainly increase the cost of the UAM operations later. So do you think that will add more complexity and also maybe raise the cost and hinder kind of the development of this coming industry?
So I think the bigger things on my mind is that your cost of my personal opinion, the cost of the vertiport is already so high when you consider connecting up with the electric grid. The electric grid improvements that NASA has hired a study to look at are in the millions if we need to recharge them. And then also the land itself, right, is in the actual design for support, right? If you're landing these aircraft that are heavy on parking lots or what have you, building tops. So in my view, it's basically you're already at multi-millions hooking up to the grid. So thinking about adding in specialized firefighting equipment, to me, that's on the margins. I think we're going to have two main ones. One is the land space to do it, and the second is the electric grid.
So what happened if we do not need the power grid? We could charge the batteries somewhere in a depot and transport those charged batteries to those vertiports.
So I think that's possible. But again, from the operational perspective on range of these, my gut instinct on this is that offsite charging is fine, but then you're going to dramatically reduce your range coming in from the safety perspective. And so I personally do not see offsite charging as viable for getting the service off the ground. Gut instinct.
Charge the battery.
Oh, okay. Yeah, got it. Okay, so again, one of the things that so you could do that. One of the things though is that these battery packs are very heavy. And one of the things to think about in aviation is if we consider safety to be the number one of the arguments I've heard about swapping out the battery packs is that battery pack is a point of failure, right? Every time I take it off or bring it in, I may be causing wear or tear, meaning some aircraft or OEMs that I've talked with do not want to be swapping out batteries. They'd rather keep it connected and yeah, from the wear and tear perspective, from a safety perspective. Plus, they're heavy. They are heavy.
They're very heavy. Yeah. I think for the electric vehicle side, there's a two kind of paths. One is charging, and another one is switching the battery.
It is. Yeah. And the way I like to say about it, for better, for worse, right? Okay. So let's think about some of the strategies that happen on the ground side. What's the worst thing that happens if you've got a failure on your EV ground vehicle? Okay, I'm going down the road and things like stop, right? What's the worst thing that happens on a safety side if you've got EV aircraft fail, right? You probably have a fatality on your hands. So I think that the safety aspects on the electric aircraft side are a little bit different than on the ground side. So some of the strategies that are envisioned that work on the ground side perfectly, I don't think will necessarily translate into the air. Battery swapping for me is one of them.
All right, any more questions? No. Okay. Do we have any more questions from online audience? I didn't see any from meeting chat, and I couldn't see the raised hand. So, and given that we it's already 1 o'clock, 1:03, so I think we can end the seminar right now. If you have more questions, we will probably be here a little bit longer, and you can ask a question. I think next week we're going to have a professor from our Florida local university, and come to talk about what initiatives their university is. So the information actually is on the Qatar seminar website. So if you go there, you can find that. And I look forward to see everybody next week.